So welcome back to Drawing Wildlife with Arts Clubhouse. Last week we looked at mammals' eyes, and this week we're going to be looking at drawing our first mammal. So the first mammal we're going to be drawing is the wolf, and just like we did with the birds, we're going to create a structure of shapes to follow so that we've got everything in proportion. And we'll start with the circle for his face. And then across the middle, we've got the eyes, and they sort of create like a forehead here in the middle. And then, just like we did with the birds, there are certain things that some mammals have. So the proportions that we look at for mammals are the proportions of this snout. Is it got a long snout, short, wide snout? Are its eyes close together? Are they far apart? Does it have pointed ears on the top of his head, curved ears at the side of his head, and the proportion of the actual head in comparison to the rest of the markers. Now, with a wolf, we've got quite a narrow forehead, and we've got this long, narrow nose or muzzle, and then we can bring that into here. Then we put the nose on top, so the nose shape is kind of like this. And then the eyes we looked at very closely last week. Always start with a circle. So let's look at the proportions for the wolf. I'd say its head is divided into three. 1, 2, 3, more or less correct. Now for the ears, they kind of start in line with the eyes a little bit. They're just inside where the eyes start, and they come around almost in line with the side of the head. Come around and almost in line with the side of the head. Something more like that, and maybe I've made them a little bit tall. I'm just going to adjust that, and we can see there we've got the essential shaping for a wolf. So last week we spoke about the eyes of the mammals, and we looked at those in great detail, and now it's a chance to put that practice to the test and include those eyes in our actual observational drawing. Just as we did last week, I'm going to go ahead and shade all this in the same way we've already practiced. And then I'm making some light marks around the edges to indicate the fur. What I want to concentrate next on are the dark areas and the main features, one of which is very dark and very main is the nose. So it comes in and around like this. Then we have the nostrils. And it's all very dark, so we have to do some quite subtle shading here, which we can do together. Just really, it's about observing which is the really dark areas and which are the dark but slightly lighter areas. Now, very dark, there's no light getting inside these nostrils. So right underneath the edge of those nostrils is very dark. Coming a little bit lighter to the edge here. This line around here, also very dark. So we're sort of getting this nostril shape. Really dark line around here. And dark under the edge of the nostril, getting a little bit lighter towards the edge. With the muzzle itself, it has a slightly dark area here, some shading there, then it gets really dark along this edge here. And it almost has a shiny bit as it essentially bends around the corner. So we're going to leave that bit quite light. I'm going to remove some of the guidelines. So we have a little light bit here, a little light bit here, and a little bit of light around the nose. And then the darker shading, but more of a mid-tone, kind of comes in the middle here. So we've got dark and mid and light tones, just as we did with the eyes last week. Mid tones coming up here, mid tone coming around here into this dark area here, and the dark then moves into mid. Okay, so when you've got that, you can then make sure the other areas are shaded but in a lighter shade. So I've got a mid-tone coming down the middle here, and then a very light shade at the edge. How about underneath? We've got a little bit of dark shade coming around the nostril, and then the rest is kind of a mid shade, I'm going to say. We can always work back into it. That gives us an excellent guide to the muzzle. It gives us a good description. We can see that there's a sort of a bend here. We can see that it's really dark here. There's some holes in there. So we are good for now. Come back to that later. And then the other dark area is this kind of mouth section here. It's just a shape like that, and then there's a little bit of mid-tone coming around here. Now to separate that from the nose, I'm going to do a little bit dark under there, and then this mid light shading here. And the lips around here are very dark. So then we have these kind of jowls coming around this shape here, and just underneath the jowl, as we come up to we can see there is a dark patch there. I'm going to do it quite scribbly because either side of the mouth here there is fur, and to create the idea of fur, I'm going to just do a little bit of a scribbly shade and come and work into it again later. So we know that that's not smooth. Let me lift some of these guidelines off again here. Now, even before we've gone any further, I think because we've got the essential bones of the wolf, we're already starting to see that wolf-like feeling coming through, and the rest will be just a bit of shading, a bit of texture, and let's see how we're going to approach that now. So as usual, we're looking for dark areas, so there's quite a lot of dark description around the edges of the fur here and the edge of the ear, so let's address that. So we're going to go heavy dark here, and it kind of comes around, describing the top of the head. Lots of little furry lines. So the type of marks that I'm making are just, you can hear my pencil, dash, 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 to try and give an effect or a texture or a pattern of fur, and pressing really hard to create the dark fur areas. And then around the edge of the ear, along all the edge of the ear, we've got quite a dark definition. We'll add the mid-tone fur in a minute. Some fur coming here. And the same on this ear. It's kind of dark all the way along. I'm not doing a straight line, I'm doing a sort of textured line to try and describe that in some form. And it comes around here, this describing this edge again, mid-tones and dark tones here, lots of little fluffy edges, and we're really getting some description of what that's made of, this furry expression. So once we've got our very dark areas in, I'm going to highlight where the light areas are. We've got a light section here, this comes all fluffy in here, and a light section here, comes fluffy, and then we've got a light area at this edge. So we leave those bits light. I've marked them out just as we did with the birds. So I think what I'll do is I'll continue to mark off the light areas that we're going to avoid shading, and some of those come around the eyes, so I'm going to lift some of the guide marks. So this bit goes up into the fur a little bit, this bit comes around the eye. So those are areas of light that we don't want to touch when we're shading. And then there's a mid-tone, kind of a dark to mid-tone running through this section here. So I'm just marking out areas. On the nose we have an area coming up here of a very light to mid-tone of shading, and that joins into the darker forehead shading. So we just start breaking our image up into areas of tone. When we talked about shading last time, we were talking about a gradual shading, going from pressing really hard on the side of the pencil to a light, and then lifting the pencil off the paper to a lighter touch, to almost really super tickling the paper to really making that tonal variation. When we're looking at mammals with fur, we try and create that tone through our strokes. So we might start with a really dark edge, and then the fur might get a little bit lighter, and then it might get a little bit lighter. And if we're using strokes rather than sweeps of the pencil, we can start to get a bit more of a furry texture, and then it might get a bit darker again. And that dark blending into the lighter texture can be created by using these strokes. It takes quite a long time. It's not an easy process. Now I'm going to go lighter again. Lots of light touches. I'm tickling my paper now. And then I can take it darker again. I'm going to go darker here and then blend that into the light. Lots of little textures, strokes. Now when you make a stroke and lift your pencil up, you can see it's darker here and narrower here, just like a hair. So pressing hard at one end and lifting it up, different lengths, and different angles creates the idea of hair or fur. So it is worth practicing, just making a few marks to practice getting tonal variation and a kind of a fur feel to your mark making. So let's come back to how we're going to apply this to our image. We've marked out the dark tones and we've marked out the light tones where we're not going to put much mark making into place, and everything else is going to be somewhere in between. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that by looking at the reference image and creating marks in that certain way. So I'll start with the ears. I'll fast forward the film, but please stop and start to follow and catch up as you will. So I'm going to start across the top here. What I'm thinking is this is looking very round, whereas on the reference images it was just much more triangular. So I'm going to start making the tone represent that. So the dark areas come in a much more sort of triangular way down here and follow this line instead. Okay, it kind of looks funny now, doesn't it? It looks like a big bald face with a little tufts of hair at the top there. So let's address some of this internal shading. We've already marked out the lines, so we know where they're going to go. So there's a little bit of shading coming up here. And the key is the small strokes of the pencil, but also the direction of the pencil strokes go in the direction of the fur. So it all comes inward like this. The fur comes into here, and our pencil strokes have to represent that. So we're already starting to see it take some shape, and we've put our highlights in here and on this side around the eye and this eyelid. Now let's make sure we know exactly where the light parts are underneath the eyes so that we don't make any over shading in those areas. So this kind of comes in here, comes down there. We've got a lovely big shape of white here as that comes out to the edge there. So I'm just going to lightly put that in. This all comes out in a kind of triangular shape here, so I'm going to lightly put that in. Same on this side, it's all going to come out wide here, and that goes into the neck there. And then where is our white shading here? see that on the screen. We've got light areas all around the face here. Light area all around the face here. Big white areas coming into the chin, and the chin itself is very nice and light. So we're going to shade around the edges to start off with our dark and mid-tone fur. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. So just a little tip about these side areas. You take the stroke outwards, lightly, randomly, applying little pressure or a lot of pressure depending how dark you want that to be. Then we've got sort of quite a sort of sharp edge, doesn't look very fur-like on this side. So to blend that back into the fur, we do the same in the opposite direction. So we take the fur out in that direction and back into the lighter colour here with the same kind of strokes. So your dark area ends up in the middle of the two. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense and you can get shading away. Work into all the areas where you see darker tone that might not have pressed as hard first time round. Okay, we're starting to get a real kind of nice texture. So I'm just going to go and do the same again on this side. Dark edges to blend in with the light fur, so we create our strokes going inwards. So there's a feathery effect, and then we blend inwards to the light fur, and then carry that on outwards around the same line. So we know we've got the definition where we want to transition from darker or mid-tones to the light tones. So we create that edge, and it's not just a blunt edge. So now we've got that real kind of definition, and we can just carry on blending it in. over and address the darker areas on the nose, but instead of doing actual fur texture, we can probably get away with just doing some shading for that. So I'm going to turn my pencil on its side. I'm going to take the dark shading up here into the muzzle, and it's lighter. So we still want to follow the direction, but we want to just make it much lighter. And then we've got some very delicate little marks around here, so we're almost just tickling the page, and then they sweep into this area here. So I'm just doing some very light marks as a suggestion rather than actual fur. Okay, then if you can see anywhere that you think needs blending or darkening, then go ahead and darken that. So the last little bit that I'm going to do is, we're nearly finished, but the last little bit that I'm going to address is all this fur under here. And to be fair, I think I'm just going to randomly do feathered in, like we've done on the rest of it, and feather out. And pop a couple of whiskers on. I always think it's quite tricky to get whiskers right. Got one coming up here, a couple of darker whiskers there. Re-darken the eyes. Anywhere that you think needs a bit more pop, work back into. So I'll just have one final recap. First of all, creating the shape, checking the length of the muzzle, position of the eyes, shape of the ears. Once you've done that, it's looking at where the shade falls in the eyes, where the shade falls in the nose, and how to create a kind of overall feeling of fur. So I hope you've enjoyed the session today, and please keep drawing. Please send your drawings in. I love to see them, as always.